In Vienna, the city of symphonies, a lost voice is being brought back to life. Clara Schumann, 19th century virtuoso pianist, composer, and wife of Robert Schumann, left behind fragments of a final symphony. For over a century, those incomplete pages gathered dust, until now. In 2025, a team of musicians and engineers fed those fragments into a generative AI model. The result? A completed Clara Schumann symphony, set to premiere this fall with a live orchestra. As one conductor exclaimed, "It feels like Clara herself has walked back into the room." Clara Schumann's Forgotten Pages. Clara Schumann was far more than Robert's wife, more than a supportive figure history too often paints her to be. She was one of the most accomplished pianists and musical minds of the 19th century, a performer who could fill halls across Europe and leave critics astonished. Yet in the male-dominated culture of her age, her compositions were rarely given the same weight as those of her husband or their friend Johann Brahms. She composed songs, piano pieces, chamber music, works full of delicacy and fire, but time and again she set aside her pen, convinced that the world was not yet ready to hear her voice as a composer. Later in life, Clara began sketching something even more ambitious, a symphony. She left behind tantalizing fragments, outlines of orchestration, pages marked with half-finished harmonies and unfinished themes. These were not casual doodles. They reveal a mind working at scale, reaching toward the grandeur of a form that had, until then, been almost exclusively claimed by men. Yet Clara never completed the work. Perhaps she doubted the reception it would receive. Perhaps she lacked the support that male contemporaries could count on. Or perhaps she simply grew weary of fighting a battle against silence. "I hear music in my head," Clara once confessed in her diary. "But the world will not yet hear it from me." Those unfinished manuscripts, mere fragments of melody and orchestral design, were left behind as whispers from a brilliant mind. More than a century later, they have become the fragile seeds of today's experiment, a chance to let her unheard music finally breathe. The Vienna Project. Fast forward to 2025. In the heart of Vienna, a city where symphonies once shook the rafters of gilded concert halls, a new experiment quietly takes shape. It is not a performance, not yet, but a collaboration between two worlds that rarely meet: musicians and machine learning scientists. At the University of Music, researchers carefully gather the surviving fragments of Clara Schumann's late-life sketches, pages where a melody appears only to vanish, where orchestration is hinted at but never realized. These delicate manuscripts, some no more than a few bars of ink and silence, are scanned, digitized, and prepared for analysis. The aim is both simple and audacious: to feed Clara's unfinished work into a generative AI model. But not just any model, one meticulously trained on her existing catalog, the works of her contemporaries, and the broader fabric of 19th century symphonic writing. The hope is to create something that feels less like invention and more like restoration, as if Clara herself were being given the tools to finish what she began. One engineer later described the project not as an act of creation, but of listening. "We weren't trying to generate music out of thin air," he explained. "We were trying to listen to Clara's ideas, to her voice frozen in notation, and allow the AI to suggest what might have come next. It was less about replacing her hand, more about opening a door she had been forced to leave shut." How the AI composed. The process was delicate, not a conjuring trick, not a shortcut, but a slow, attentive reconstruction. First, the team taught the system to hear as Clara heard. It listened to her harmonic language, the way she favored luminous thirds, the sudden shadows of minor inflections, the cadences that resolved with poise rather than bravado. It mapped the turns she returned to and the surprises she saved for later. Then it studied her craft at the line-by-line level, how voices move against each other, how inner parts carry meaning, how phrasing breathes. Counterpoint was treated not as puzzle-solving, but as conversation. melody answering melody, questions answered softly and sometimes left open. The machine learned where she tended to shape a phrase upward, where she let it fall, and how she placed silence like a rest that thinks. Around this, the model absorbed her musical circle. Brahms' warmth and architecture, Robert Schumann's mercurial swing between tenderness and storm, and Mendelssohn's clarity and light. Influence was not permission to imitate. It was context, a map of the neighborhood her ideas walked through. Finally, the fragments themselves. Incomplete motifs, broken gestures, promising beginnings, stranded mid-bar. The AI aligned these shards with her known patterns, inferred likely continuations, and tested them against her style. Nothing leapt forward wholesale. Everything advanced by small steps, measure by measure, then phrase by phrase, the shape of a movement emerging like a photograph in a tray. Each suggestion faced a human ear. If a line felt too modern, it was softened. If it grew timid, it was urged on. The goal was coherence without pastiche, authenticity without ventriloquism. It wasn't magic, a researcher explained. It was mathematics tuned to artistry. Key takeaway number 1, AI as a musical archaeologist. The first great lesson of the Vienna experiment is that artificial intelligence, for all its futuristic sheen, can act less like a composer and more like an archaeologist. We often picture AI as a machine that invents from nothing, conjuring works out of digital ether. But here, its role was almost the opposite. Rather than imagining a brand new symphony in its own voice, the system carefully reconstructed something that Clara Schumann had already begun but could not complete. It was not about replacing her artistry, but about excavating the traces she left behind, restoring a musical ruin to something closer to the living architecture she envisioned. The process resembles restoration more than creation, just as conservators brush dust from a broken statue, fit together scattered fragments, and reconstruct missing details without erasing the sculptor's original hand. So too did the AI work with Clara's manuscripts. Each faded motif, each half-finished orchestration became a clue. The model supplied plausible continuations, but always within the stylistic boundaries Clara herself had already established. Where the paper trailed off, the AI leaned on her harmonic language. Where ink stopped mid-bar, it extended the phrase in her familiar contours. As one historian involved in the project remarked, this is less about AI writing music and more about AI listening cross centuries. It listens to her silences, her hesitations, and dares to imagine the steps she might have taken next. In this light, the AI becomes not a rival composer, but a careful custodian, one helping Clara's lost symphony finally step forward into sound. Musicians react. When the first AI-assisted crafts were placed on music stands and brought to life in rehearsal, the room shifted. Musicians leaned into their instruments, played the opening phrases, and then stopped, some with tears in their eyes. The lines carried the unmistakable fingerprints of 19th century romanticism, lush harmonies, yearning melodies, and an architecture that felt both intimate and grand. Yet within that familiarity was something startlingly new, as though the ink had only just dried. One violinist described the experience in hushed tones. It was as if Clara's hand reached through time and guided ours. We weren't just playing notes, we were completing a conversation she began. The music had the uncanny quality of being both discovered and created, as though unearthed from the past, yet alive with present breath. But awe was not the only response. Debate soon followed. Some purists dismissed the work outright, insisting that without Clara's explicit completion, it could never be considered authentically hers. To them, the AI-generated passages were no more than clever mimicry, a ghost wearing her voice. Yet others counted with equal passion. Music, they argued, has always been shaped by collaboration between performers and composers, teachers and students, tradition and innovation. If that collaboration now stretched across centuries, mediated by technology, Was that not simply the next chapter in the art's evolution? For many in that room, the experience transcended the arguments. What mattered was not whether every measure was real Clara, but that her unfinished ideas had been given a voice. And in that moment, the silence she left behind was broken. Key takeaway number 2, the line between creation and completion. The second lesson of this experiment is perhaps the most unsettling. Where does authorship end and invention begin? Clara Schumann left behind only sketches, threads of thought, fragments of melody. When those fragments are extended by a machine, are we still hearing her? Or are we hearing something else entirely? Is this truly Clara's unfinished symphony, restored after centuries of silence? Or is it simply an AI's clever pastiche of her style, dressed in 19th century harmonies? The project forces us to confront one of art's oldest questions. What makes a work authentic? Is authenticity bound to be physical hand that moved across the page, the ink that stained the paper, the final seal of authorship? Or can authenticity live in something less tangible? The spirit, the voice, the sensibility that shines through, even if carried forward by others. By this measure, Clara's influence is unmistakable. Her harmonic fingerprints remain. Her phrasing lingers in the air. The AI did not create from nothing. It extended her gestures, filled in her silences. For performers, the debate was more than academic. One cellist summed it up in rehearsal. Does it matter if Clara wrote every note? What matters is that it feels like her voice again. That's the miracle. To the musicians, the piece was not an algorithmic trick, but a living continuation of her artistry. To skeptics, it remained an imitation. And perhaps that tension is the point. The Vienna Project did not just revive Clara's music, it reopened the question of what it means to finish a work when its author is no longer here to sign the last bar line. Preparing the premiere. Now, Vienna readies itself for a moment that feels equal parts history and resurrection. This fall, in one of the world's most storied concert halls, an orchestra will unveil something no audience has ever heard. A symphony bearing Clara Schumann's name, completed a century and a half after she first set her pen to paper. It is not a rediscovery in the sense of a lost manuscript suddenly found in an attic trunk. It is more fragile, more daring, an act of listening across time, of weaving together what she began with what technology has carefully extrapolated. The chosen venue could not be more fitting. The Musikverein, with its golden balconies and glittering chandeliers, has long been home to the echoes of giants, Brahms, Bruckner, and Mahler. Soon, Clara's voice will join them, not as a footnote to her husband or her circle, but as a composer in her own right. The symbolism is impossible to ignore. A woman whose work was overshadowed in life will finally command the full force of an orchestra in Vienna. Behind the scenes, rehearsals stretch long into the evening. The conductor, score marked with fresh ink, urges the players not to treat the music as a curiosity or a museum piece. We must play it as if Clara herself were in the audience, he tells them. Each phrase is shaped with reverence, each crescendo tested for balance between romantic grandeur and intimate voice. As the premiere approaches, anticipation builds. What began as a fragment in Clara's diary has become a concert program that will ask Vienna and the world to listen anew. Key takeaway number 3, technology as a bridge. The third great lesson to emerge from this project is that technology is not merely a tool of invention. It can also be a bridge. Too often we imagine machines as barriers, inserting themselves between us and the authenticity of human expression. But here, the opposite is true. In this experiment, AI acted as a medium connecting two distant worlds, the 19th century and the 21st. Clara's symphony, once silenced by circumstance and history, found a voice again, not despite technology, but through it. To hear her music performed now is to experience a strange and beautiful crossing of time. The fragments she left behind were fragile, like faint pencil sketches nearly rubbed away. On their own, they might never have been heard outside a scholar's archive. But with the aid of modern computation, they have been coaxed into sound. The result is not an alien intrusion of algorithms into art, but a bridge, a structure spanning centuries, carrying Clara's ideas safely from her unfinished manuscript into the ears of a 21st century audience. This is the paradox of our age. The same technology often blamed for distraction, noise, and cultural clutter can also become a vessel of memory. AI cannot replace Clara's genius, but it can amplify it, recover it, and place it back into dialogue with the present. In that sense, the Vienna Project is less about computers writing music and more about humans finding new ways to listen, across centuries, across silences, across time itself. The human element. For all the algorithms and processing power, the final voice of the project was unmistakably human. The AI generated possibilities, dozens of sketches, continuations, and orchestrations. But they were raw material, not finished art. Editors sifted through these drafts with care, weighing each passage against Clara's surviving works. Did the harmony lean too modern? Did a phrase wander into territory she would never have chosen? Again and again, human judgment intervened, curating the machine's suggestions and discarding what rang false. From there, the musicians took over. Notes on paper are only the beginning. The living breath of music comes in rehearsal, in the choices made about tempo, phrasing, and color. A line that looked sterile on the score could bloom into tenderness under the right bowing. A brass chord could thunder with defiance or glow with restraint, depending on how it was shaped. Each rehearsal layered interpretation over reconstruction, until what had begun as digital fragments began to sound like something undeniably human. The AI gave us a skeleton, the conductor explained. We had to breathe the soul into it. His margin notes filled pages, crescendo marks, altered dynamics, instructions for the strings to play with more intimacy, the winds with more air between phrases. Slowly, the music stopped feeling like a reconstruction and began to feel like a performance. This was never a contest of man versus machine. It was man and machine, working together, extending a hand across time. Clara began the work. The AI extended it. But it was humans who gave it voice, breath, and soul. Why this matters? Why does this matter? Because Clara Schumann's voice was long overshadowed, consigned to the margins of history as performer first, wife second, composer last. For too long, her music was treated as an afterthought to Roberts or Brahms. Her sketches tucked away in archives instead of being given the stage they deserved. Now, through the careful use of modern tools, her unfinished symphony has the chance to stand alongside the masterpieces of her century. Not as a curiosity, but as a living work of art. This is not simply about one performance in Vienna. It is about finally giving Clara her rightful place in the canon of great symphonists. And beyond Clara, the implications stretch wide. If AI can serve as an archaeologist of sound, what other silenced voices might be heard again? Imagine fragments of Bach's lost cantatas, reconstructed with the same devotion to style. Imagine Mozart's sketches, once left incomplete after his death, given the chance to be heard in full. Imagine Mahler's abandoned symphonic outlines, carried forward with the same mixture of human judgment and computational care. This would not be mere imitations, nor cheap tricks of mimicry, but respectful reconstructions, bridges between intention and completion. In the end, the Vienna Project is about more than algorithms or manuscripts. It's about listening across centuries, refusing to let silence have the last word. Clara once wrote that she heard music the world would not hear. At last, the world is listening. From Clara's incomplete pages to the glowing code of AI, to a live performance in Vienna, this project is proof that the past can sing again. As one pianist whispered after rehearsal, Clara's voice was never lost. We just needed new ears to hear it. So what do you think? Is this Clara Schumann's final symphony or a 21st century collaboration with her ghost? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you'd love to see more stories of how technology reshapes history, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Because sometimes the future's greatest gift is to bring the past back to life. Stay blessed and stay curious.